What is the most believable conspiracy theory? I have a local one. I live in the South. It very rarely snows, and if it does, it typically doesn't stick. But I could believe the local weather station, which is sponsored by grocery stores, typically plays up the chance it'll snow. I can't count how often they talk about the threat of snow only for nothing to happen. And if it does, it's not gonna stick around. But people buy out milk and bread and stock up for Fimble winter every time. Like clockwork. The New Coke conspiracy is a great, non-political one. The idea is that New Coke, a formula change of the most iconic soft drink in history, was done deliberately so that people wouldn't notice the change from sugar to high fructose corn syrup. I'd watch a movie about that one. The Korean fan death conspiracy, a great thing to Google for those of you that like random information. So for some reason, for like 60 plus years, some people in Korea believed running a fan in a closed room can be fatal. A conspiracy theory came out that the Korean government actually tried to put legitimacy behind this myth of fan death, just to lower the amount of energy consumption in homes. Considering how prevalent propaganda by governments were in the early and mid-1900s. I totally believe it. Edit, I never said government propaganda doesn't exist anymore, guys. LMFAO. I was just pointing out how obviously prevalent it was during those times, especially due to the wars occurring. Not the most believable, but fairly believable. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, of World War I fame, could easily have been prevented but was deliberately allowed to happen by militaristic elements in the Austro-Hungarian government who wanted to use it as an excuse to move against Serbia. Why the US never fully denied there being aliens in Roswell? It's in the middle of the Cold War. Even the possibility of the US having access to such technology would cause the KGB to waste enormous resources on investigating the incident, which they did. They don't give a shit what the people think or know, they never did. They wanted to distract the Russians. That PETA isn't an actual animal rights organization, and are instead funded by the meat industry to make other animal rights groups look like crazy people. Basically make any undermining any argument for treating livestock better, since they can point to PETA and say look how unreasonable these guys are. It is actual Muppets canon that Kermit the Frog, in some way, had a role in bringing down the Twin Towers in the terror attacks of September 11, 2001. In a Muppets Christmas film released in late 2002, Kermit is shown a glimpse of what New York City might look like if he had never been born. Among the scenery of this alternate reality NYC, we find none other than the Twin Towers proudly standing in the background. They were, of course, long destroyed in Kermit's normal reality. And yet, in the world without Kermit, the war on terror is missing its powder keg spark. Who would have thought that green piece of fuck could Kermit a terror attack on US soil, but there it stands unimpeachable. We have concrete, canon proof of involvement. Why the world hasn't stopped and asked further questions is only further proof of a media cabal keeping this conversation away from the masses. The Twin Towers would still be standing if it weren't for Kermit the Frog. Al-Qaeda was the puppet this time, and Kermit the hand within. Our smartphones are spying on us. I used to go as far as to stick my nose up at people who didn't own smartphones because they felt like they were being spied on. I thought it was the most ridiculous, delusional thing ever. That was before I started frequently getting ads for products that I had never purchased or ever looked up online, but had recently spoken about with someone. Just the other day I was talking to someone about how I hadn't eaten it in years, but I remember loving President's Choice white cheddar macaroni and cheese as a child, and then literally right after that getting ads for it, when I had never searched anything remotely close to it, or seen any ads for it. This happens to me frequently. Extremely creepy shit that's almost not even a conspiracy anymore. Everyone has experienced this, and somehow we're not talking about it more. The CIA knew that we're terrorists on American soil and that they were from Saudi Arabia, but due to their code of not informing anyone else of their actions, allowed the terrorists to act. This explains how the US was able to figure out what had happened so quickly. The CIA are still doing Project MKUltra. Why would they release the files if they could carry it out without much of a problem? So that they could deter public interest by making them believe the conspiracy was over, allowing them to kidnap international psychics without drawing attention. Flight 93 was shot down. The towers were already hit, a plane hit the Pentagon, and arguably that plane was headed to a prominent target in Washington. They were flanked by Air Force fighter jets and in a perfect remote place with a low population southeast of Pittsburgh. The debris field is huge and expansive, and the whole area is still cordoned off. You know, that wouldn't surprise me. It's in the playbook as a response to that type of scenario. Definitely plausible. The problem is that the crash site doesn't match the pattern of a plane being shot down by a missile. When a plane is shot down by a missile, it would have debris falling well before the bulk of the fuselage hit the ground. The plane would lose structural integrity and break apart as it descended. You would have a path of debris stretching some distance and scattered debris around the final impact area. MH17 was shot down by a missile and is a great example of what we should have seen. It's vastly different from the debris field of Flight 93, which has a single point of impact at extremely high speed. This is why all the debris is so small. The high-speed impact basically disintegrated the plane. All the signs point to a deliberate and controlled crash. The term conspiracy theorist is used by the people in power to ridicule and mock the people who look too closely into the suspicious things the government does in order to discredit them. That way, when a conspiracy theorist actually finds the truth, no one would believe them because they're a crazy, tinfoil hat-wearing, conspiracy theorist. That Hitler never killed himself but actually managed to flee to Argentina or some other South American country. A bunch of rich and powerful people are working together to trick the average stupid person into giving them more power. The rich and powerful become more rich as powerful, seem logical. That the vast majority of humanity exists to serve the wealthy elite, who adroitly spread conspiracy theories, religion, bigotry, politics and other distractions to keep the struggling poor distracted from their chains. Reagan flooded the inner cities with crack as a result of the Iran-Contra deal. Which is crazy, because on the face of it it seems implausible, but then it seems implausible that he managed to completely get away with it. Up till recently, one of the most blatant abuses of presidential power in modern times. I'm not big on conspiracy theories, but I can't seem to wrap my head around how so many people reject the COVID lab leak theory. There's literally an institute of virology where they manipulate COVID viruses in Wuhan. Add that to the fact that this is such a contagious and irregular virus, it seems like common sense to me. I think at one point Fauci even admitted its feasibility, and he's the main voice against this theory. Operation High Jump, basically Nazi bases in Antarctica. In the 40s the US sent around 4,000 troops along with planes, vehicles, and they had to retreat. There's an area literally called Neuschwabenland, and apparently there's a tropical region that has houses and all sorts of crazy shit. Considering it's known Nazis fled to Argentina, I find it pretty possible. I don't buy into the moon landing being faked, but I could totally see the moon landing video being fake. The space race was largely about public confidence in the government, so I find it hard to believe that there wasn't at least a backup plan in case we didn't make it to the moon before Russia did. Some means to inspire confidence in the US's superiority. It seems feasible that they pre-recorded a video to broadcast to the nation at a designated time regardless of whether or not the moon landing actually worked out. Michael Jackson isn't dead. He was in an enormous amount of debt leading up to his death, though he had just been acquitted of his sexual assault allegations a few years before. His reputation as a child abuser and creep was solidified. He was preparing to tour. He realized he didn't have the heath to do it, which would have earned him a lot of money. Instead, he dies and immediately becomes the hottest selling artist on the planet. Sales of albums, songs, and merchandise soar. A major motion picture about his life is released 4 months after his death, grossing $260 million. His ranch is sold, and he quietly eliminates his debt, salvages his reputation, takes the money and disappears to live the reclusive life he had been trying to live since 2005. With the big payday and nobody looking for him, I'm sure he was able to secure a place to live alone, secluded from the world. That Mars is the former Earth, and much of, if not some of, life transplanted here, maybe accidental microbes on a lander, as this planet became more habitable, and Mars uninhabitable, many millions of years ago. Intelligent species may have reached a technological apex on Mars before it lost its atmosphere and eventually just eroded into an iron desert, far before we grew intelligent enough, or evolved enough, to know what's up. Most believable to me at least. We like to think we're special, but it's entirely possible we weren't the first ones to figure out the fundamental sciences to such a degree of mastery. There's also overwhelming evidence that Mars was once Earth-like. The Titanic wasn't the Titanic. It was its sister ship, the Oceanic. Theory: when the Oceanic was launched from dry dock, a short time after she collided with a Royal Navy ship. The impact position was on the front right side of the ship. The Oceanic was no longer seaworthy and had to be brought back into dry dock for repairs. Her sister ship, the Titanic, was nearing completion, but was visually identical. The names were swapped, the Oceanic became the Titanic. So the new Titanic has a patch job that needs a lot of money to make seaworthy. During the voyage the collision with the iceberg happens. The ship that comes to the rescue was sitting in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean for many hours with their engines at full pressure, not moving. During a time when coal was very expensive, just burning money. Ultimately it was an insurance job, went very wrong. Obviously no one was supposed to die or become the tragic loss of life it became. But the newly named Titanic, originally Oceanic, collides with the iceberg in the same position as it collided with the Royal Navy vessel. Was it supposed to be as devastating as it was? Did they expect a few dents or just damaging the patch on the ship's hull? Anyway, plenty of info around this theory through a few Google searches. Do I believe it? Not wholeheartedly, but it has an air of plausibility. Apologies for format, I'm on my phone.